The sun beat down on Silvermist, Arizona territory, the same way the townspeople's accusations beat down on Sarah McCallister. She trudged through the dusty main street with her wrists bound in iron chains, the weight of them nothing compared to the burden of being called a liar and a thief in a town where she'd sought refuge. The year was 1878, and justice for a woman alone was as scarce as rainfall in the desert summer. "Keep walking, you lying snake," Deputy Wilson snarled, shoving her forward with enough force to make her stumble. Her threadbare dress, once a cheerful blue, was now gray with dust and torn at the hem from her journey to Silvermist. Sarah kept her head high despite the jeers from onlookers gathering on the boardwalks. She wasn't what they claimed a con artist who'd swindled the wealthy rancher Stanley Prescott out of his prized pocket watch and a small fortune. The truth was far more complicated, but no one would listen to her side of the story. "I didn't steal anything," she said, her voice barely audible above the growing crowd. "Save it for the judge," Wilson replied, yanking her chains, "though it won't do you any good. Prescott's got half the territory in his pocket." They were approaching the jailhouse when the crowd parted like the Red Sea. A tall figure on horseback moved through the throng with the easy confidence of a man who knew his own worth. The massive black stallion beneath him snorted and pawed at the ground, seemingly as impatient with the spectacle as its rider. "What's all this about, Wilson?" The horseman's deep voice carried down the street. Sarah looked up, squinting against the sun to see a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hat shaded features that might have been handsome if they weren't set in such a severe expression. "Just bringing in a thief, Mr. Harrington," Wilson called back, his tone suddenly deferential. "Caught her trying to leave town with Stanley Prescott's valuables." The rider Harrington dismounted in one fluid motion, the spurs on his boots jingling as his feet hit the ground. He towered over most of the men in the crowd, and when he approached, Sarah could see that beneath the trail dust, his clothes were of fine quality. Not a typical cowboy, then. "That true, miss?" he asked, addressing her directly, which was more courtesy than anyone else had shown her since her arrest. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "No, sir, I'm innocent of what they're claiming." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone called out, "She's a liar, Garrett." "Don't let those pretty eyes fool you." Garrett Harrington studied her face for a long moment, and Sarah felt as though he was seeing beyond the dirt and dishevelment, beyond even her fear, to something truer. Then, unexpectedly, he turned to Wilson. "Those chains look mighty uncomfortable on such delicate wrists," he remarked, his voice casual but with an undercurrent of steel. "I reckon they're unnecessary, given that she's not exactly going to outrun the lot of you." Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Prescott was very clear about how she should be treated. Said she was slippery as an eel." "Did he now?" Garrett's eyebrow rose. "And since when does Stanley Prescott dictate how the law is enforced in Silvermist?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and damning. Sarah watched in astonishment as Garrett Harrington, apparently a man of some consequence in this town, stepped closer to Wilson and extended his hand. "The key, if you please, deputy." Wilson hesitated, his eyes darting to the gathered crowd, many of whom worked for Prescott in some capacity. "I don't think that's wise, sir." "I didn't ask what you thought," Garrett replied, his voice still pleasant but with a hard edge that made Wilson flinch. "The key." After another moment of internal debate that played out visibly on his face, Wilson reached into his pocket and produced a small iron key. Garrett took it and approached Sarah, who stood frozen in disbelief. "Miss," he prompted. "McCallister," she supplied. "Sarah McCallister." "Miss McCallister," he continued, inserting the key into the lock of her chains. I apologize for the reception you've received in our town." The lock clicked open and the chains fell away, clattering to the dusty ground. Sarah rubbed her raw wrists, wincing at the pain but relishing the freedom. "You can't do that," Wilson protested. "She's under arrest." "On what evidence?" Garrett countered, turning to face the deputy. "Has anyone actually seen her take anything? Has Prescott filed a formal complaint with proper documentation?" Wilson's mouth worked silently for a moment. "Well, no, but then I suggest you focus on getting some actual facts before you chain up women in the street." Garrett turned back to Sarah. "Miss McCallister, I believe you could use a proper meal and a chance to tell your side of the story. Would you care to join me?" Before Sarah could respond, the crowd parted again, this time for a portly man in an expensive suit, flanked by two rough-looking ranch hands. Stanley Prescott had arrived, his face flushed with outrage. "What is the meaning of this, Harrington?" he demanded, his jowls quivering. "That woman is a thief and a liar." Garrett didn't flinch. "So you keep saying, Stanley, but in this country we typically require evidence before punishment. Novel concept, I know." Prescott's face grew redder. "She was my housekeeper. I took her in out of charity, and she repaid me by stealing my grandfather's watch and $200. Sarah found her voice at last. "That's not true. I worked for you honestly for 3 months. You never paid me what you promised, and when I asked for my wages, you—" She faltered, unwilling to speak of what had happened next in front of the entire town. "She's lying," Prescott shouted. "Deputy, arrest her immediately." Wilson looked uncertainly between Prescott and Garrett, clearly torn between the wealthy rancher's demands and whatever authority Garrett held. "I think," Garrett said slowly, "that we should all calm down and handle this properly. Miss McCallister will come with me to my office where she can give her statement. If there's evidence of wrongdoing, she'll face a proper trial, not a lynch mob." "Your office?" Prescott sneered. "What authority do you have, Harrington? You're just a cowboy who got lucky with a few investments." Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm also the federal marshal for this district, as you well know, and unlike our good deputy here, I don't owe you any favors." A hush fell over the crowd. Sarah stared at the man beside her with new understanding. Not just a wealthy rancher then, but a lawman. Whether that would help or hinder her remained to be seen. "Now," Garrett continued, placing a protective hand on Sarah's shoulder, "unless anyone has actual evidence to present, I suggest you all return to your business." He guided Sarah toward a building at the end of the street, ignoring the muttering of the dispersing crowd. His touch was light but firm, and for the first time since her arrest, Sarah allowed herself to hope that someone might actually listen to her. The marshal's office was sparsely furnished but clean, with a desk, a few chairs, and wanted posters lining one wall. A door in the back presumably led to the cells, but Garrett directed her to a chair facing his desk rather than toward that ominous portal. "Miss McCallister," he said, settling into his own chair, "I think it's time you told me what really happened between you and Stanley Prescott." Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I came to Silvermist 3 months ago looking for honest work. My parents died last year in Kansas, and I had nowhere else to go. Mr. Prescott hired me as a housekeeper for his ranch outside town." Garrett nodded, his expression encouraging her to continue. "At first, it was just hard work, but I didn't mind. He promised $5 a week plus room and board." She twisted her hands in her lap. "But he never paid me. Each week he had an excuse: the cattle market was down, he was waiting on a bank draft, he'd pay me double next time. After 3 months I was owed $60, and I needed that money." "So you confronted him," Garrett guessed. Sarah nodded, her eyes downcast. "Last night. He'd been drinking heavily at dinner. When I asked for my wages, he said I could earn it in his bedroom. Her voice faltered. When I refused, he became angry. Said no one would believe a penniless girl over him anyway. He tried to force himself on me. Garrett's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. I fought him off and ran. I took nothing but my own belongings, I swear it. This morning, I was at the stagecoach office, buying a ticket with the last of my savings from before I came here, when the deputy arrested me. Mr. Prescott claimed I'd stolen his watch and money. She looked up at Garrett, her eyes pleading. I'm not a thief, Marshal. I've never stolen anything in my life. Garrett studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. Finally, he nodded. I believe you, Miss McCallister. Relief washed over her, so powerful she nearly wept. You do. Stanley Prescott has a reputation that extends beyond his business dealings, Garrett said carefully. You're not the first young woman he's hired who's left under difficult circumstances. What will happen now? Sarah asked, dreading the answer. Even with the marshal on her side, Prescott was a powerful man. First, you need proper care. Those wrists need tending, and I expect you could use a meal and rest. He stood. My sister runs a boarding house on Pine Street. She'll take good care of you while I sort this out. I can't pay, Sarah began. Garrett waved away her concern. Consider it the town's apology for your treatment. Now let's get you settled, and then I'll have a conversation with our friend Stanley. As they stepped back onto the street, Sarah was painfully aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Her reputation in Silvermist was already in tatters, and she'd barely been in town long enough to establish one. Ignore them, Garrett advised quietly. People are quick to judge and slow to reconsider. Speaking from experience, Marshal, she asked, surprised by her own boldness. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Let's just say I understand what it's like to be misjudged. The boarding house was a two-story building painted a cheerful yellow, with white gingerbread trim and a wide front porch. It stood in stark contrast to the utilitarian structures that made up most of Silvermist. Flower boxes hung from the windows, spilling over with geraniums and petunias, bringing unexpected color to the dusty town. Garrett led her up the steps and through the front door, which opened into a cozy parlor. A slender woman with dark hair piled atop her head looked up from her needlework, her eyes the same stormy gray as Garrett's, widening at the sight of them. Garrett, I wasn't expecting you today. Her gaze fell on Sarah, taking in her disheveled appearance and raw wrists. And who might this be? Grace, this is Miss Sarah McCallister. She's had a difficult morning and needs a place to stay for a few days. He gave his sister a meaningful look. Sarah, this is my sister, Grace Harrington. Grace set aside her needlework and approached, her manner warm but assessing. Of course. Any friend of Garrett's is welcome here. She eyed Sarah's wrists with concern. Those need attention right away. Come with me, dear. Before Sarah could protest, Grace had taken her arm and was guiding her toward a staircase. Garrett, there's coffee in the kitchen if you're staying, she called over her shoulder. I'll be back later, he replied. I have some business to attend to first. Sarah glanced back to see him watching her, his expression unreadable. Then Grace was ushering her upstairs, chattering about hot water and clean clothes and the healing properties of her special salve. In a daze, Sarah found herself in a small but comfortable bedroom, where Grace insisted she sit while she fetched supplies. When the older woman returned with a basin of warm water, clean cloths, and a jar of ointment, Sarah finally found her voice. You're very kind, but I don't understand why you're helping me. You don't even know me. Grace's hands were gentle as she cleaned Sarah's abraded wrists. My brother believes you're in trouble and innocent of wrongdoing. That's enough for me. She applied the ointment, which smelled of herbs and beeswax. Besides, I've lived in Silvermist long enough to know that Stanley Prescott is not to be trusted, especially with young women. Your brother. He said he's a marshal, Grace nodded, her nimble fingers wrapping soft bandages around Sarah's wrists. Federal marshal for the Arizona Territory, though he doesn't broadcast it. Most folks just know him as a successful rancher. She secured the bandage with a small pin. There, how does that feel? Much better, thank you, Sarah hesitated. Miss Harrington, Grace, please, Grace. I want you to know that I didn't steal anything from Mr. Prescott. I wouldn't. I believe you. Grace patted her hand. Now let's find you some clean clothes. You're about my size, I think. Then food and rest. You look exhausted, poor thing. Within the hour, Sarah found herself bathed, dressed in a borrowed dress of soft blue calico, and seated at Grace's kitchen table with a bowl of hearty stew and a slice of fresh bread. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite passed her lips, and then she had to force herself not to wolf down the food like a starving animal. Eat as much as you like, Grace encouraged, pouring her a glass of cool buttermilk. There's plenty more. Sarah glanced around the cheerful kitchen with its gleaming copper pots and colorful curtains. Your home is lovely. Thank you. I've had this boarding house for 5 years now. It's not always easy being a widow in a town like Silvermist, but I manage. Grace sat across from her. Garrett helps when I need it, though he's got his hands full with his own ranch and his marshal duties. He seems formidable, Sarah ventured. Grace laughed, a melodious sound that brightened the room. That he is. But underneath that stern exterior beats a heart of gold. He just doesn't let many people see it. She studied Sarah with a shrewd expression. He must have seen something special in you to intervene as he did. Before Sarah could respond to that bewildering statement, the front door opened, and Garrett's deep voice called out, Grace. Are you in the kitchen? Where else would I be at this hour? Grace replied, rising to her feet. Garrett appeared in the doorway, his imposing figure filling the frame. He'd removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair with a slight wave to it. His eyes immediately found Sarah, and something in his expression softened momentarily. You're looking better, Miss McCallister. Sarah, please, she said. And yes, your sister has been very kind. He nodded, then turned to Grace. I need to speak with Sarah privately. Is the parlor available? Of course. I'll bring you both some coffee. Grace gave Sarah an encouraging smile as she rose from the table. Garrett led her to the parlor, where a small fire crackled in the hearth despite the warm day outside. He waited until she was seated in an armchair before taking the settee across from her. I've spoken with Prescott, he said without preamble, and with his housekeeper, Mrs. Simmons. Sarah's heart quickened. Mrs. Simmons? I didn't know she was still there. She was ill when I left. She's recovered enough to give a statement. She confirmed your story about not being paid and about Prescott's inappropriate behavior last night. Garrett's expression darkened. She heard the commotion and saw you fleeing his room. She also says nothing was missing from the house this morning when she checked. Hope flared in Sarah's chest. Then you can prove I didn't steal anything. It's not quite that simple, Garrett cautioned. Prescott is sticking to his story. He's influential in these parts, and Mrs. Simmons is afraid of losing her position if she testifies publicly. So it's still my word against his, Sarah said, her momentary hope deflating. For now, but I have some ideas. Garrett leaned forward, his expression intense. Prescott claims you stole his grandfather's pocket watch, a gold hunter case with an engraved elk on the cover. Is that correct? Sarah nodded. He showed it to me once, very proud of it, said it was worth more than I'd earn in a lifetime. And you never touched it? Never. He kept it locked in a box in his study. Garrett nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Here's what's going to happen, Sarah. You'll stay here with Grace for a few days while I investigate further. Prescott has agreed not to press formal charges until I've completed my inquiry." He agreed to that. Sarah was skeptical. A grim smile touched Garrett's lips. "Let's just say I was persuasive. I reminded him that false accusations against an innocent person could be considered a serious offense, especially if made to a federal marshal." Grace entered with a tray of coffee cups, setting it on the small table between them. "Will you be staying for supper, Garrett?" "Not tonight. I have more work to do." He rose, towering over both women. "Sarah, try to rest. You're safe here." After he'd gone, Sarah helped Grace clear the dishes from her meal, her mind whirling with the day's events. "Your brother," she said hesitantly. "He seems very determined about this case." Grace measured coffee grounds into a percolator with practiced movements. "Garrett has a strong sense of justice. Always has, even as a boy." She placed the percolator on the stove. "And if I may be so bold, I think he sees something of himself in your situation." "What do you mean?" Grace sighed, turning to face Sarah. "When we first came to the Arizona Territory 15 years ago, Garrett was barely 20. He took work as a ranch hand for a man named McCallister. There was an incident money missing from the ranch safe. McCallister accused Garrett without evidence." Her expression darkened at the memory. "They beat him badly, those ranch hands. Would have hanged him if the real thief hadn't been caught in Tucson 2 days later bragging about the job." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "That's terrible." It shaped him, that experience. He worked twice as hard afterward, saved every penny, bought his own land. Then law school in St. Louis, the marshal's badge. Grace smiled sadly. "He doesn't forget what it's like to be falsely accused with no one to speak for you." Later that night, lying in the comfortable bed Grace had provided, Sarah stared at the ceiling, her thoughts in turmoil. She was grateful for the Harringtons' kindness, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her troubles were far from over. Stanley Prescott didn't strike her as a man who would let a slight to his reputation go unanswered, marshal or no marshal. She drifted into an uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with iron chains and Stanley Prescott's cruel laughter. But somewhere in those dreams was also the steady presence of gray eyes that promised protection. And for the first time since her parents' death, Sarah didn't feel entirely alone. The next few days passed in a strangely peaceful rhythm. Grace's boarding house housed 3 other boarders, a schoolteacher, a widow who worked at the general store, and an elderly gentleman who spent most of his time on the front porch smoking a pipe and telling stories of his days as a scout for the army. None of them seemed particularly interested in Sarah's presence, which was a relief after the public spectacle of her arrest. Grace put her to work helping with meals and laundry, waving away her protests. "Idle hands lead to worry," she said firmly. "Besides, I can use the help, and you can earn your keep until this matter is settled." On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Sarah was hanging laundry in the back garden when she heard the gate creak open. Turning, she saw Garrett approaching, his expression uncharacteristically pleased. "Good afternoon, Sarah," he greeted her, removing his hat. The sun caught in his dark hair, revealing strands of silver at his temples that she hadn't noticed before. "Marshal Harrington," she replied, suddenly conscious of her work-reddened hands and the stray wisps of hair that had escaped her bun. "Garrett, please." He gestured to the wooden bench beneath an apple tree. "May I have a moment of your time?" They sat side by side, the clean scent of drying laundry mingling with the earthier smell of leather and horses that seemed to cling to him. "I have good news," he said without preamble. "Prescott's pocket watch has been found." Sarah's heart leaped. "Where? How?" "In the possession of one Thomas Ryder, a drifter who worked briefly at the Prescott Ranch last month. He was arrested in Flagstaff for public drunkenness, and when they searched him, they found the watch. The sheriff there recognized the description from the wire I sent out. So I'm cleared." Sarah could hardly believe it. Better than that. Ryder confessed that he stole both the watch and the money. He was hiding in Prescott's house the night you left, planning another theft. He overheard everything: Prescott's refusal to pay you, his advances, your escape. Garrett's eyes were warm with satisfaction. Ryder's not a good man, but apparently even he has limits. He said he was glad to set the record straight about you. Relief washed over Sarah like a wave, leaving her light-headed. "I don't know what to say. Thank you seems inadequate." "No thanks necessary. It's my job to find the truth." Garrett hesitated, then added, "Prescott has been informed. He's been ordered to pay your back wages in full, plus an additional sum for the damage to your reputation." "He agreed to that." Garrett's smile was wolfish. "As I said before, I can be persuasive. Especially when I mentioned that falsely accusing you of theft could result in charges against him, not to mention the potential scandal if your other allegations became public knowledge." Sarah absorbed this, hardly daring to believe her ordeal was truly over. "What happens now? That depends on you. The stage leaves for Tucson tomorrow morning, if that's still your plan." There was something in his tone she couldn't quite identify, a note of questioning, perhaps even regret. Sarah looked down at her hands, considering. She had planned to go to Tucson, where she had heard there were positions for educated women in the growing city. But now, "I haven't decided yet," she admitted. "Grace has offered me a position here, helping with the boarding house." "And will you accept?" She glanced at him, trying to read his expression. "Would that be agreeable to you? I wouldn't want to impose on your sister's kindness any further." "Grace makes her own decisions," Garrett said, "but if you're asking my opinion—" He paused, his gaze holding hers. "I would be pleased if you stayed in Silvermist." Before Sarah could respond to that surprising statement, Grace called from the back door. "Garrett, are you staying for supper this time? I've made your favorite chicken and dumplings." Garrett's eyes remained on Sarah's face. "If Miss McCallister doesn't object to my company." "I'd be delighted," Sarah replied, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. Supper that evening was a lively affair. The other boarders joined them at the long table in the dining room, and Grace had outdone herself with the meal. Garrett sat across from Sarah, and she found herself repeatedly glancing up to find his eyes on her, quickly looking away when their gazes met. After the meal, while Grace and the other boarders retired to the parlor, Garrett asked Sarah if she'd like to take a turn around the garden. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of desert sage and distant rain. "I've been thinking about your situation," Garrett said as they walked side by side down a gravel path bordered by Grace's carefully tended rose bushes. "Oh." Sarah's pulse quickened. There was something in his manner that suggested this conversation was important. "Grace told me you were a teacher back in Kansas before your parents passed." Sarah nodded. "For 2 years, I taught at a small school outside Lawrence. Silvermist is growing. The town council has been discussing the need for another teacher at the school." He glanced at her. "The position would come with a modest salary and a room at the schoolhouse, if you were interested." Sarah stopped walking, turning to face him. "Are you offering me a teaching position, Marshal Harrington?" "The town council would make the formal offer, but yes, I've spoken with them about you." He hesitated, then added, "I hope I haven't overstepped." "No," Sarah said softly. "It's very thoughtful of you. I'm surprised you would go to such lengths for someone you barely know." Garrett was quiet for a moment, his gaze directed at the distant mountains, now purple in the fading light. "I told myself it was about justice, making things right after how you were treated." He looked back at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "But I think we both know it's more than that." Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. "What are you saying, Garrett?" "I'm saying that from the moment I saw you in that street, something about you called to me. Your courage, your dignity despite those chains." He took a step closer. "I've never believed in love at first sight, Sarah. It seemed like a notion for dime novels and silly girls. But these past few days, getting to know you, watching how you've handled adversity with grace and strength, I find myself questioning my skepticism." Sarah stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might shatter this moment that felt both impossible and inevitable. "We barely know each other," she whispered. "True," he acknowledged. "And I'm not asking for promises, just time. Time for us to learn about each other properly. If you stay in Silvermist." The offer hung between them, weighted with possibility. Sarah thought of her plans, her determination to make a new life for herself after losing her parents. She'd never considered that new life might include a man like Garrett Harrington, strong, principled, with eyes that seemed to see into her very soul. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would like to apply for that teaching position." The smile that transformed Garrett's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, sudden, brilliant, revealing warmth that had been hidden in shadow. Hesitantly, he reached for her hand, his touch gentle as he enfolded her fingers in his. "May I call on you properly then?" "Sunday dinner, perhaps?" Sarah's own smile bloomed in response. "I'd like that very much." As they continued their walk through the twilit garden, their hands remained linked, a physical connection that mirrored the more intangible bond forming between them. Sarah didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she looked toward it with hope instead of dread. The following week saw Sarah settling into life in Silvermist. The town council, impressed by her credentials and influenced by Garrett's recommendation, offered her the teaching position at the school. She accepted with gratitude and found unexpected joy in returning to the profession she'd loved in Kansas. True to his word, Garrett called on her that Sunday and every Sunday thereafter. Their courtship progressed with a steady deliberation that suited them both: rides into the countryside on his gentle mare while he rode his stallion, picnics by the creek that ran through his property, quiet evenings on Grace's porch, talking about books, their pasts, their hopes for the future. Sarah learned that beneath Garrett's stern exterior lay a thoughtful, intelligent man with a dry wit that often caught her by surprise. He'd lost his parents to cholera when he was 18, leaving him to care for 15-year-old Grace. The false accusation of theft had nearly broken him, but instead, it had forged a deep commitment to justice that led him to study law and eventually become a marshal. "I never expected to fall in love," he confessed one evening as they watched the sunset from the hilltop above his ranch. "My life seemed full enough with my work, my land, keeping an eye on Grace." "And now?" Sarah asked, her heart in her throat. He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "Now I can't imagine my life without you in it." 2 months after her arrival in Silvermist, on a crisp October evening, Garrett proposed. They were walking back to Grace's boarding house after the town's harvest festival, the streets quiet after the day's celebrations. "I have something for you," Garrett said, reaching into his pocket. Sarah watched, curious, as he withdrew a small pouch of soft leather. From it, he produced a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained, his voice rough with emotion. "I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right woman to wear it." He took her hand, his gray eyes serious in the moonlight. "Sarah McCallister, I love you more than I thought possible. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes as she nodded, too overcome for words at first. Yes, she finally managed. Yes, Garrett, I will marry you. The ring slid onto her finger as if it had been made for her. Garrett drew her into his arms, his kiss tender and reverent under the starlit sky. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small white church on the edge of town. Snow had fallen the night before, a rare occurrence in that part of Arizona, blanketing Silvermist in pristine white that glittered in the winter sunlight. Sarah wore a gown of ivory satin that Grace had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once adorned Garrett's mother's wedding dress. The church was filled with townspeople, many of whom had initially viewed Sarah with suspicion, but had come to respect her as their children's teacher. Even Mrs. Simmons attended, having left Prescott's employ after he sold his ranch and moved to California, his reputation in Silvermist tarnished beyond repair. As Sarah walked down the aisle on the arm of Grace's elderly boarder, Mr. Thornton, who had offered to give her away, she saw only Garrett waiting at the altar, his eyes shining with love and promise. In that moment, the chains of her past the pain of losing her parents, the humiliation of Prescott's accusations, the fear of being alone in the world fell away completely, leaving only the future stretching before them. I take you, Sarah McCallister, to be my lawfully wedded wife. Garrett's deep voice resonated in the small church as he recited his vows. I promise to love, honor, and cherish you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parts us. Sarah repeated her own vows, her voice clear and steady, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had cut away her chains, literal and figurative, and offered her not just freedom but a life filled with love. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett's kiss was both gentle and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause, led by a tearful Grace. They celebrated with a reception at Grace's boarding house, where the dining room had been transformed with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles that cast a warm glow over the gathering. Garrett and Sarah moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their hands rarely separating throughout the evening. As the party began to wind down, Garrett leaned close to whisper in Sarah's ear, "Are you ready to see your new home, Mrs. Harrington?" Sarah nodded, excitement fluttering in her stomach. She'd been to Garrett's ranch house several times during their courtship, but always with Grace or others as chaperones. Tonight would be different. They said their goodbyes, enduring the good-natured teasing of the wedding guests, and climbed into Garrett's sleigh. The night was clear and cold, the stars overhead like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Garrett tucked a warm buffalo robe around Sarah's legs before taking up the reins. "Cold?" he asked as they set off, the sleigh runners gliding smoothly over the snow. "Not with you beside me," she replied, nestling against his solid warmth. The ranch house sat on a rise overlooking the valley, its windows glowing with welcoming light. Garrett had sent his ranch hands ahead to light the fires and lamps, ensuring the house would be warm for their arrival. When they reached the front porch, Garrett surprised her by scooping her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a smile, carrying her across the threshold. Inside, the house had been transformed. Sarah had helped decorate it over the past weeks, adding feminine touches to the masculine space curtains at the windows, colorful quilts, vases for flowers. But tonight, there were additional touches, fresh flowers despite the season, candles everywhere, a fire crackling in the hearth of the main room. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking it all in. "You're beautiful," Garrett countered, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "And you're finally home." Home. The word resonated through Sarah's being. After months of uncertainty, after years of grief following her parents' deaths, she had found a home again, not just a place, but a person. Garrett was her home now as she was his. Later, as they lay in the large four-poster bed that dominated the master bedroom, Sarah's head resting on Garrett's chest, she traced idle patterns on his skin. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his fingers tangled in her loose hair. "About chains," she replied honestly. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with concern. "Chains. How strange it is that being chained is what led me to you. If I hadn't been arrested that day, if you hadn't seen me in the street." She shook her head wonderingly. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best. Garrett's expression softened. He took her hand, kissing the inside of her wrist where faint marks still remained from the iron manacles. "No more chains for you, my love. Only freedom. Only love. Only love," she echoed, drawing him down for a kiss that sealed their promise to each other. Spring came to the Arizona territory with a riot of wildflowers painting the desert in unexpected colors. Sarah divided her time between teaching at the school and learning to be a ranch wife. Garrett's hands respected her, tipping their hats when she passed and quickly accepting her as the mistress of the ranch house. On a warm April evening, as they sat on the wide porch watching the sunset, Sarah took Garrett's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she told him, her eyes searching his face for his reaction. For a moment he seemed frozen in place, his expression unreadable. Then a smile spread across his features, transforming them with joy. "A baby, you're sure?" Sarah nodded. "Doctor Mitchell confirmed it yesterday. He thinks the baby will come in November." Garrett gathered her into his arms, his embrace gentle as if she'd suddenly become fragile. "Sarah," he whispered against her hair, "you've made me the happiest man in the territory." Throughout the summer and into fall, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Garrett converted the small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, crafting a cradle from pine with his own hands. Sarah sewed tiny garments in the evenings, her heart swelling with love for the child growing within her. Grace was a constant presence, offering advice and support, her excitement about becoming an aunt nearly matching Garrett, and Sarah's joy about becoming parents. November brought early snows to Silvermist, and with them, Sarah's labor pains began. Garrett rode through the night to fetch the doctor and Grace, his face white with fear for his wife and unborn child. The labor was long and difficult. Sarah clung to Garrett's hand through the worst of the pain, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. When dawn broke on the second day, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that immediately captured her father's heart. "She's perfect," Garrett murmured, cradling the tiny bundle with hands that seemed too large for such a delicate task. "Look what we made, Sarah." Sarah, exhausted but radiant, reached out to touch the downy head of their daughter. "What shall we call her?" "Hope," Garrett suggested. "Because that's what she represents. Hope for the future, hope for all the good things to come." "Hope Grace Harrington," Sarah agreed. "A perfect name for a perfect girl." The years that followed were filled with the joys and challenges of family life. Hope grew into a spirited child with her father's gray eyes and her mother's gentle heart. 2 years after her birth, she was joined by a brother, Daniel, who inherited Garrett's height and Sarah's love of books. Sarah continued to teach until Daniel's birth, then devoted herself full-time to raising their children and managing the ranch house. Garrett's reputation as a fair and effective marshal grew, though he began to delegate more of his duties to deputies as his family responsibilities increased. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat by the fire after the children were in bed, Garrett presented Sarah with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, accepting it with a curious smile. "Open it and see." Inside, lying on a bed of velvet, was a delicate silver bracelet set with turquoise stones. But what caught Sarah's eye was the clasp fashioned in the shape of a broken chain. "Garrett," she breathed, lifting it from the box. "To remind us both," he said, taking the bracelet and fastening it around her wrist, "of how our story began, and how far we've come." Sarah touched the broken chain clasp, emotion welling in her throat. "From chains to this beautiful life, I never dreamed such happiness was possible. Nor did I." Garrett drew her into his arms. "Thank you for taking a chance on a stern marshal who couldn't bear to see you in chains. Thank you for believing me when no one else would." Sarah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been in town that day? I don't believe in coincidence," Garrett said thoughtfully. "I think I was meant to be there. We were meant to find each other." In the years that followed, their love only deepened. The ranch prospered, their children grew, and the town of Silvermist evolved from a rough frontier settlement into a respectable community. Sarah eventually returned to teaching when both children were in school, founding a library that became the pride of the town. Garrett gradually stepped back from his marshal duties, focusing on the ranch and his growing family. He never lost his sense of justice, serving on the territorial council and later helping to draft Arizona's state constitution. As for Stanley Prescott, he eventually lost most of his fortune through poor investments and gambling. Years later, when he attempted to return to Silvermist, he found himself unwelcome in the town where the Harringtons were now leading citizens. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Garrett and Sarah hosted a celebration at their ranch, which had grown into one of the most successful operations in the state. Friends and family gathered to honor their enduring love story. Hope, now a beautiful young woman of 19, had recently become engaged to the son of the town doctor. Daniel, 17 and as tall as his father, was planning to attend university in the East, with dreams of becoming a lawyer like Garrett had once been. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Garrett found Sarah standing alone on the porch, gazing at the stars. "Happy anniversary, my love," he said, slipping his arm around her waist. Sarah leaned into him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder as it always had. 20 years. Can you believe it? The best 20 years of my life." He turned her to face him, his gray eyes, now crinkled at the corners with laugh lines, still regarding her with the same love they had shown on their wedding day. "Do you remember what I promised you when I took those chains off your wrists?" Sarah smiled up at him. "You didn't actually promise anything that day. You just asked if I was hungry." Garrett laughed, the sound rich and warm in the night air. "Always practical, my Sarah. But later I promised you freedom and love, and you've given me both in abundance." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the familiar contours. "I never thought, that day in the street, that the stern marshal who freed me would become my whole world. And I never imagined that the brave woman in chains would become mine." He bent to kiss her, a kiss that held all the passion of their youth and all the depth of their years together. Inside the house, their children and friends were still celebrating. Hope's clear laugh rang out, followed by Daniel's deeper chuckle. Grace, now gray-haired but still spirited, was regaling the younger generation with stories of the early days in Silvermist. But here on the porch, under the vast Arizona sky, Garrett and Sarah Harrington stood wrapped in each other's arms, celebrating a love that had begun with broken chains and had forged instead the unbreakable bonds of family, commitment, and enduring devotion. "I love you, Sarah Harrington," Garrett murmured against her hair. "Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows. And I love you, my marshal," she replied, her heart as full as it had been on their wedding day. "For freeing me in every way that matters." They stood there together, silhouetted against the light spilling from their home, two people who had found in each other not just love, but redemption, purpose, and the courage to build a life that neither could have imagined alone. From the cruel bite of iron chains to the gentle clasp of loving arms, their journey had been one of transformation, not just of circumstances, but of souls bonded by love's enduring power. And as the stars wheeled overhead in the vast Arizona sky, they knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them as they had faced all others together, unbound and utterly free in their love for each other.